Welcome back to The Line. This week, a hearing continued in Santa Fe on teacher evaluations. Two teachers' unions brought a lawsuit against the state public education department. They want to halt the current teacher evaluation system that uses student test scores and merit, may I also say, as 50% of their evaluation. That's the real sticking point there. But Governor Martinez also announced this week she's going to again push for legislation that would require holding back third graders. Boy, we've talked about that at this table for years now, it seems like. Let's start first things first about the situation in Santa Fe with the hearing. What are you gleaning from this hearing? What are you hearing, not to be throw a pun at you, but any surprises from either PED's side or from the union side on this?
No, I've said before on this panel, there's an absolutely toxic relationship. What AFT said about $100 cash cards, just, telling teachers, oh, right. Free money? No, you shouldn't use that. I mean, we're beyond dialogue. It's fight and obstruct.
Right.
And this is not something really extreme that this administration cooked up. Mm-hmm. This is part of Common Core, No Child Left Behind. How we get our federal dollars is we have to tie teacher evaluations to some sort of test score. Mm-hmm. It's a requirement. Mm-hmm. This is not something that we came up uniquely in New Mexico to punish our teachers with. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think this helps our teachers and our state figure out how to move forward in this environment. Mm-hmm. I think it's a distraction, and I think it makes the relationship takes the relationship even further south. Mm-hmm.
Harry Van Buren, as Merritt says that it's not designed to punish teachers. Teachers do in fact feel punished by this system, as a matter of fact. And they have to fundamentally make a case that that is in fact happening. Right. That it's not improving teachers' performance, that there's other things going on. They just don't have a lot to work with at this point. Right. It's almost like they're trying to argue a theory. Right. And I understand it, but go ahead.
And there's an enormous amount of research on value-added models and other things like that, and it's really all across the board. Right. And you've seen that actually in a lot of the testimony in this case. Are these good models? Are they bad models? Do they provide useful information? Are they completely irrelevant and arbitrary? And so when you can't even agree on what the facts are, whether it's in terms of the test scores or whether these models actually make a difference, it's almost like both sides are talking past each other, and intentionally so. So Merritt's point about a breakdown in trust and a very toxic relationship, I think you're really seeing that in this particular case. And so no matter how it turns out, it's really unclear to me where we go from here.
Yep, thank you. Rob, that's exactly what I was going to ask about that. Where do we go, depending one way or the other? If the teachers win, so to speak, where does PED go at that point?
This is a really big decision the judge is going to have to make. And I think the judge will have to make the decision based whether or not he's going to take a really open-ended view of this and say, okay, yeah, let's talk about the specifics of it. Is 50% really the correct number for the teacher evaluation? Should it be more like 25?
That's right.
Or will the judge say, we're just going to talk about the very narrow issue about whether PED has the ability, the right, the legal right to make these Common Core decisions. But if the judge rules and says, in some sort of way in favor of AFT, wow, then all bets are off, because then there are questions about federal funding with Common Core, because Arnie Duncan, soon to be stepping down as the head education honcho with the Obama administration, he's all in favor of it. Not specifically with the 50%, but with the Common Core standards.
That's right. In fact, the American Federation of Teachers national group, they're involved with this. There's a lot of outcome here for a lot of stakeholders. Let me flip it around. If PED wins out, what happens then? For the rank and file teacher, what do you do? I mean, you have to do it then. You just have to do it. The point wasn't.
Well, I
proven.
think morale is going to be hit big time if there's, if PED ends up winning. I think we're going to see the judge rule somewhere in the middle of those two things. And I think in general, judges are pretty conservative as far as their, making sure that they're not sort of so far out there that the outcome would be implausible. So sort of where do we go from here? I think that if there's a decision where, I think that we're going to see some things from both, good for PED and some things good for AFT. I don't see any one side being completely, victorious in this situation.
But would rank and file accept anything less than 50% on? I'm sorry, that's not true. If anything less than 50% for teacher evaluation based on scores is not lowered, what kind of victory could they possibly have in the middle? Do you know what I mean?
Well,
that's
I
a
think
difficulty.
that's the sticking point for them. And I think, well, Merritt makes a point about, these are standards that are at the federal level. They're part of Common Core. I think the 50% is the sticking point for them. And PED does have the discretion to set, what that percentage is going to look like, and 50% I think is really where the heartburn is for the teachers. They're seeing that, there's a lot of, obviously there was a huge outcry from students and parents about standardized tests, so we've seen that continuously. And so to then force teachers to be evaluated based on those standardized tests that are basically flawed in a lot of people's minds, I think is a real heartburn for them. And they think that it's just something that's not attainable in terms of long-term success. And that then, the end result is that a lot of those teachers decide, maybe we shouldn't be teaching and maybe we should retire.
Right.
And then you end up having a situation where you're lacking. I mean, we already are facing a teacher shortage, and there's huge morale problems. So I think this is a hugely important issue, and we're hopefully going to see a decision fairly soon, one way or the other. And I think ultimately it will mean, hopefully, that both sides will need to go back to the drawing board and figure out something that's much more reasonable that both sides can live with. And I think the outcome that makes the most sense is, neither side will feel completely like they've won, but each side may get something out of this case.
But I think that even, let's just say that they came down and said, all right, no more than 25% of the score is going to come down. I don't know if that's going to satisfy the teachers union. I mean, they might be happy about that particular outcome, but that's not going to stop the fight.
There's a whole other range of things.
Yeah, they don't want this.
It's a philosophical debate.
Yeah, it is a philosophical debate. But even if they do come down to 25%, that's still somewhat of a victory for them. I mean, they're not going to be happy, but ultimately they're not
going to get rid of Park.
It's not going to solve the heartburn question.
Yeah,
Sure.
exactly. Harry, interesting when you read about a lot of expert witness testimony, a lot of on the PED side, they had a representative from a charter school, but also somebody from I think it was the Hobbs district. He actually admitted that he's actually put teachers that were rated ineffective back on the payroll, and is working with them on a remediation program because it was, to Laura's point, the man is out of teachers down there. He does not have teachers just hanging around in the street corner waiting for the job. He's got like 30 openings he needs to fill.
Right, exactly.
That's the reality of the situation these people have to deal with. So that has to be accommodated, it seems to me, in the judge's feeling about this as well. What's the impact,
I think this was the Roswell superintendent. And he made the point, actually, or he actually said on the stand that he'd signed the license renewal of somebody who is not rated as an effective teacher, which is really not permitted under the state guidelines. So there's a philosophical debate that's going on, but there's also the reality. It's not terribly surprising that somebody in Roswell or Hobbs or lots of other places would find it difficult to attract highly qualified teachers. And that goes to Laura's point about how do we do a couple of important things with teacher evaluation? How do we improve the teachers who need to be improved and the teachers who can improve, have them exit the profession? But at the same point, we also have to retain the good teachers that we really need. And both of those objective functions, I think, are really, really difficult to put together under the same evaluation system.
We're under a minute, Mayor, but I want to sneak in. I mentioned the governor's putting third grade retention back on. Your quick thoughts on this? We've hashed it around in our state and this table for a long time now.
I got to say, we get hung up on retention, but it's early intervention and dollars and classroom intervention to help kids from kindergarten, first, second grade read. Because a Republican is behind it and it says retention, the opposition is all up in arms. And Republicans, I think, to their discredit, also look the same way at Head Start and pre-K programs.
Fair enough.
What if we did both? And third grade, I mean, if we don't make a decision in third grade about reading, when do we make it? Fourth, fifth, sixth? I think it's a good idea.
Interesting. We'll tackle this one in the coming weeks. Up next, we talk about a new lawsuit that seeks to keep most of the members of the Public Regulation Commission from voting on the future of the San Juan Generating Station.